This is page 308 in the perspective of Zlatka. Freedom. In the morning, footsteps, voices, a language only Fanya and I understood. A Soviet soldier stood over our ditch. "Children, get out of that hole. You are free." He reached down gently, pulled us out of the ditch. The Red Army. Pushed onward, leaving the girls and me with water and directions to a village. "Go that way," the soldier said. "Away from the fighting. You'll be safe." We walked, hand in hand, trying to ignore the stares, the pointing, the distrust of the villagers' eyes. Branya knocked on a door. "Please." The door slammed shut. A woman on the street stared, eyes wide. "You are Jews?" she asked, pointing at our yellow stars, faded, torn, dirty. I thought all the Jews were gone. Inside her home she had little, but she offered warm broth, water to drink, and water to wash. Her little girl was drawing on a pad of paper with colored pencils, a strand of paper dolls precisely cut. Fanya watched too, placed her hand over her hearts, and smiled. Chapter 14, The Perspective of Fanya. Fear again. Swarms of Soviet soldiers, men made feral from war, looking for revenge, glory, anything to fill the holes where their hearts had once been, leered at us with hunger. I cringed, wondering at a hollowness that made scrawny, filthy, sick girls look good enough to eat. Other survivors, men, women, expressions vacant, gaunt, harrowed, straggled into the village, ate whatever they could, grass, coal, chocolate from soldiers' rations, and died by morning in their own filth. Chaos, as random as Auschwitz had been. Villagers, Soviet soldiers, survivors, without enough food, water, housing, sanitation, until the Red Army arrived, bringing doctors, nurses, tents, cots, sheets, medicine, food, life. Field hospital. In the fields that were once pasture, where cows grazed, rows and rows of tents, with clean cots, so soft it was like floating, and sheets as white as the spring clouds. I clutched the heart, unwilling, still, to let it go, unwilling, still, to admit that it existed. Zlatka lay in the cot beside me, Branya on the other, Giza and Guta nearby. Their muffled sobs came to me through the gauze of exhaustion. Soldiers still leered until an officer appeared. I didn't know his name, didn't know his rank, didn't know his name. He smiled. I recognized him, though I'd never seen him before. He could have sat next to Label, studying Torah. He could have stood to say the mourner's Kaddish for all he'd lost. "Are you a Jew?" he asked. I nodded. "Shalom Aleichem, peace upon you," he said. Treatment. Doctors examined us, gently poked and prodded. Nurses bathed us, kept us clean, let us sleep, but we were not allowed to eat. Slowly, a sip or two of broth, a tablespoon of mashed potato. Though hunger gnawed, I knew I'd seen what happened when one rushed. One sugar cube melted on my tongue. A treat, sweetness I'd forgotten existed. It took weeks to learn to eat again. Visitors with clipboards moved through the rows, asking, "What is your name? Where are you from? Are you a Jew?" I answered their questions, but they did not answer mine. "Where is my family? Are they alive? Where will I go? What will I do?" It would take longer to learn to live again. Realization. It was the Russian officer who told me what I already knew in my heart. "Do not expect to find them," he said. It was the Russian officer who told me what I could not make sense of in my head. "Not many survived," he said. How? I wondered, did this happen? Why? I asked, did I survive? Why me? He held my hand, wiped my tears, and said, "Be thankful. You are alive. You are free." I crushed the heart to my heart. Sometimes freedom is relative. The last train. A transport back to Poland. To lives stolen from us. Back to lives we had to begin again. Zlatka, Branya, Giza, Guta, and I. Friendship forged in fear and love. Rumbled over tracks not bombed by Allied forces. Wheels screamed at the wreckage, at the ruin. 11 million dead. Never again, never again, never again. Fanya's heart on display at the Montreal Holocaust Memorial Center. And then if you go to page 329, it says, "What is true?" The story of Paper Hearts is based on a true story. 20 remarkable young women conspired against the Nazi regime, which classified them as subhuman, forced them to work as slave laborers, and thought of them as nothing more than the numbers tattooed on their arms. To commit an act of great defiance, they dared to behave as humans. They dared to behave as young women, to celebrate life, a birthday, with a simple gesture that, if they had been caught, could have meant death. For my research, I relied on the USC Shoah Foundation's audiovisual testimonies of Fanya Feiner and Zulema Pituk. The film documentary The Heart of Auschwitz, the testimony given by Zlatka on the Montreal Holocaust Memorial Center website, and several email and telephone conversations with Fanya's daughter, Sandy. Needless to say, some 70 years after the events, there are holes in the historical data. I remained as honest to the truth of the story as possible, but filled the holes in with some stories I gathered written from books written by other survivors, specifically of the Union Commando, the Sonderkommando, the orchestra, and more general survivor stories from Auschwitz. I did alter the timeline to serve the story. Neither Zlatka nor Fanya mention how they met. The Pruzhny ghetto, where Zlatka lives, was liquidated between January 28th and 31st, 1943, and she describes her arrival at Auschwitz with her mother, younger brother, and sister in January 1943. The Bialystok ghetto was liquidated on August 16, 1943, and Fanya reports leaving Bialystok the day prior to the liquidation. She then spent time in the Lomza prison in Stutthof and was transferred to Auschwitz at the end of 1943. I moved Fanya's arrival at the camp up by several months to bring the girls together earlier in the story than they were in history. Fanya was the sole survivor of her family. Her mother, father, sister Mushki, and brother Label did not survive. Zlatka lost her mother, youngest brother, and sister in Auschwitz, as the story portrays. Her father and her brother Iser did not survive either. But Zlatka had 3 older siblings, 2 brothers and a sister, all of whom survived. I chose not to include them in the story since they had left Poland prior to the war. Auschwitz was a huge complex that comprised 3 large camps: Auschwitz I, Auschwitz II, Birkenau, and Auschwitz III, Monowitz. Auschwitz was the largest of the Nazi camps and rightfully earned the reputation of being synonymous with terror and genocide. According to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., and the Yad Vashem Museum in Jerusalem, well over 1 million people were murdered at Auschwitz. At least 960,000 Jews, 70,000 to 74 non-Jewish Poles, 23,000 to 25,000 Sinti and Roma, 15,000 Soviet POWs, and 25,000 additional civilians from other countries. The Weichel Union Metalwork opened in 1943. It was one of the many privately owned industrial plants that contracted to use the prisoners of Auschwitz. Mala Zimmerbaum and Edith Galinsky escaped from Auschwitz in June 1944. They were captured in early July and publicly executed on September 15, 1944. Mala managed to cut her wrists as portrayed in the story. Several sources told the story of a woman who wrote a letter to her husband and was hanged, but did not identify her. I gave her the name of Mrs. Grossman. The Sonderkommando revolt of December 1944 and the role of the 3 young women who worked in the Union Commando are as historically accurate as I could make them, given the constraints of a novel in verse. The death marches were real. The messages inscribed in the heart are real and appear as translated by the Montreal Holocaust Memorial Center, with one exception, the last message. The translators were unable to read the handwriting on a few messages. Those places are marked with ellipses. 2 of the messages were unsigned. One was written while the girls were in Ravensbrück. It is not known where or when who wrote the last message. The Montreal Holocaust Memorial Center's translation of the message begins, "Near me are Zlatka, Fanya, Branya, Hila, and a lot of people which I know." The handwriting in the heart is difficult to read, but for the sake of the story, I changed the message, switching the name of Hila to Fila. A girl named Fila did sign the heart, so it seemed like a reasonable assumption to make. though as with so much about the heart, there is much we do not know. It is not known for certainty how many of the girls who signed the heart survived the death marches. After the war, Zlatka, Fanya, Guta, Giza, and Branya returned to Poland together. They started their lives anew, met young men, fell in love, got married, moved away, and remained friends. Zlatka emigrated to Buenos Aires, Argentina, where she still lives today, as of October 2013. Giza, Guta, and Branya emigrated to Israel and have since passed away. Karl LeBlanc and Luc Cyr, creators of the documentary film The Heart of Auschwitz, were able to locate and interview Fila and Mina, both of whom were living in Israel at the time of the filming. Helen, one of the French girls, was found living in Caen, France, but was unwilling to speak to the filmmakers. Fanya met her husband when she returned to Poland. They moved to Sweden for a time and then settled in Toronto, Canada, where they raised their daughter and son. Fanya still lives there today. Fanya treasures her gift. She kept it secret during her imprisonment and carried it through the death marches for 4 months under unfathomable conditions. She kept the heart with her when she was liberated and through the years as she rebuilt her life and her family. In 1988, she donated the heart to the Montreal Holocaust Memorial Center, where it is on permanent exhibition, telling its story of defiance, love, and friendship to thousands of people every year.